Hi, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us. I'm joined today with Preston Yoo, who most recently was a consultant for KPMG, focused on intellectual property and contract governance around software. Um, After 8 years of working with some of the largest software companies in the world, he's now shifted to his focus to economic development through the start of his own social enterprise. His goal is to create a platform that will enable sustainable, self-perpetuating economic growth instead of temporary donation-based models. So I'd like to dig into what that actually means a little bit later. He plans to spend the rest of 2019 visiting communities around the world to better understand the needs and challenges they face. So, Preston, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Rob.
So, what do you mean by that phrase? Creating a platform that will enable sustainable, self-perpetuating economic growth instead of temporary donation-based models.
Yeah, I guess that's a big mouthful to say at one
Yeah.
time. um, you know, I honestly, I was just so inspired by so many different kinds of companies that are doing a lot of this one for one, or they'll develop some programs, products, and they'll commit a big chunk of the proceeds to help communities around the world. And I'm like, man, that's so cool that you can take. It's almost like harnessing consumerism
Mhm.
and being able to use that for the benefit of other people, which I'm like, amazing. That's so great.
And when you think of when you're talking about temporary donation-based
Yeah.
models, you're talking just about like nonprofits that people donate to in order to help
hmm
starving kids around the world, that kind of thing.
Yeah, totally. That kind of thing. Also, like, if I buy, this a product here, we'll also donate that same product to, a child in need in Africa or somewhere else, which has made, immense impact. It's done so much, benefit for communities around the world, which I'm like, oh, that's amazing. But all of those scenarios, it's very temporary. It's a bit short term, if that makes sense. I mean,
Sure.
it's heavily reliant on that company organization to continue to be there to help provide that for them.
Mhm.
It also, in most, not all, but in a lot of cases, it doesn't seem to actually enable those communities to be able to kind of further themselves, or get additional development, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
There's also a lot of research to say that it's quite damaging because, one, it does create that dependence, that reliance.
Mhm.
But if you donate a whole slew of that same product, and all of a sudden that community doesn't need that product anymore, anything to do with creating that product or selling it, and anywhere up that whole supply chain, it's pretty much wiped out because now
Mhm.
they're getting it for free.
Okay.
um, right, so it's just, it is a side effect, and sometimes the benefits outweigh it. But I was just more encouraged and inspired to say, there's got to be a way to do that same kind of harnessing of consumerism, but do it in a sustainable way, in a way that empowers people. And that's really what I'm just kind of going out to try to see if we can do it. I mean, it's a bit abstract and it's in theory at the moment. So I said, hey, what better way than to actually go out there, see what kind of obstacles and hurdles these communities are facing, and see what could work.
So let's kind of talk a little bit about that. Like, explain to me what it is, at least the plan for now, about
Yeah.
what it is that you're looking to do. And when you say go out there and see what kind of challenges, what's that going to actually look like?
Yeah. So right now, my plan is to go 6 months, kind of 1 month in each general area.
Okay.
Indonesia, Myanmar, Northern Iraq, Jordan, South Africa, and Ghana.
Okay.
It's a bit of a kind of a wide brushstroke. Let's take a look. These are specific communities because either I feel have a good cultural connection into these places, and also I feel like there's a lot of opportunity in
Okay.
terms of materials and products that we can work with. So it's a bit open ended, but my initial thoughts on how we can at least start to go about it is taking products and materials, artisan crafts, any types of industries that already exist, that those economies and those communities are doing well, and then essentially modernize the design or the application of it to make it more marketable to international markets. And so the whole idea is essentially access to markets, creating essentially the trail, the tracks to for these communities to be able to connect and sell to a wider, a bigger market.
So how about an example in terms of like, and again, you might not be doing one of these, but what would an example of one of either these products or these businesses or these processes be?
Yeah. So, one example now that I'm looking at is in Myanmar. They make a special type of silk. They use lotus flowers to create essentially like a vegan silk, and they've been doing it for a while. They essentially made this only for like the robes of monks,
Mhm.
because it takes a lot of effort and time to do this. And then recently, some high-end fashion design labels have been using the lotus silk in some of their collections. So it's kind of one example of taking something that is an industry that they've been doing for a while, that they have a competitive advantage in because of the
Mhm.
climate, because of the specific kinds of agriculture that grows there, and then you know modernizing that to be able to sell it to a wider market, and
Okay.
essentially building out an infrastructure that can take it because it's already there.
So do you imagine, and it's I find this fascinating. So just tell me if I'm going too deep. But like, do you imagine that your position would be working with lots of different partners, or would you actually be starting new businesses as well? Like what do you see the link up, and where you or the business that you're developing fits
Yeah,
in along the process
yeah,
between international consumer, and like local, I don't want to say artisan, but like local producer
yeah.
of the of the specialist material.
I do think it's going to look like quite different depending on which community it is and how
Sure.
advanced the existing markets are.
Mhm.
But ideally, we could work with existing manufacturers there. So we'd be more of a cross between sourcing and, I guess, partnering with them to bring in the design, and they would actually do the manufacturing side of it. I mean, the whole goal would be to ultimately empower them to be able to do similar products. So if we created a brand that would develop a single product
Mhm.
from each of these communities, create a platform to do that, it could potentially empower the community to create similar or other kinds of products, but in that similar model,
Okay.
where they, especially nowadays, with the internet age and the fact that so many barriers that used to be up, is no longer an issue in getting to markets. If we can almost just pave the way, just create a model that others can latch onto,
Yeah.
that would be ideal. And the cool thing is, if even if we did that and created, maybe a few new revenue sources for these communities to be able
Mhm.
to sell it to a wider market, the add-on effects could be quite large if, say, now the world is kind of has a bit more visibility to these communities, and they say, hey, actually Myanmar, this lotus silk, we could actually do something else with it. And then all of a sudden other brands, other communities around the world are looking to Myanmar as an example, um, and doing other products there. That's there's no way we could single-handedly make an impact, but I think if we can create a way that others can latch on,
Yeah.
then we can make sustainable changes.
And talk me through what the thought process is behind thinking of this as a social enterprise. Like, why are you thinking about developing this as a social enterprise versus something else?
Yeah, definitely pros and cons, but ultimately, what we're trying to do is create a successful business for these economies, right? We're creating a model that is actually self-sustaining, and in order to do that, I believe we just have to create a very successful, sustainable business. So I definitely don't want to rely on um, donations. Not saying we don't want to go down that route at all, but if we're trying to maximize an economic viability for these communities and for the people that we work with. Um, that's, I think, the model that would do that the best.
Okay, cool, awesome.
Yeah.
Uh, so in terms of the trip, I know that things are still relatively uh, early on, but
Mhm.
like why you and why a trip? You know, if you're thinking about how can I make the most amount of impact, um, uh, there's quite a step between that and say, you know what, I'm going to go off on a trip to all these different places
Yeah.
in various different parts of the world. I mean, I know that you have there are connections to each of them, but it's not like you're going to one specific place, one specific market. Why did you think that was the best way for you to make the biggest impact
Yeah.
versus, I don't know, something else?
Yeah, yeah, no, totally. Um, so I see this just as the initial phase, almost
Yeah.
like R&D, market research, um, because I think a lot of times we might think we have a solution, but we don't test it enough to say, is this going to work? And I specifically chose to split my time, a third in Southeast Asia, a third
Mhm.
in the Middle East, and a third in Africa. Because if we, realistically, that's probably the biggest kind of regions for,
For the different.
development work and yeah, in those kind
Yeah.
of communities. And if we can see, are there solutions, are there kind of common threads across these communities that we can build an organization around? Um, and ultimately, I mean, I don't really even care what kind of products it is, because
Hmm.
we're more about the model and how can we do it in a way that is self-perpetuating and sustaining. So going to see, what are the things that are successful there? What are the things that are already going on? Because you know there's people there that have been there for years, and they have so much better insight into that, to what's going on. So why don't we tap into that? But yeah, and then ultimately, we're going down to understand the market better. What are the problems? What are the solutions? And yeah.
How does your background in consulting maybe impact the way that you're thinking about this? Because as you said, you say, I don't really care about the products. That's not that's not the most important thing at first.
Yeah.
Why? Do you think that comes that kind of, let's look at the business aspect of it? Does that come from your consulting? Does that come from other elements in your background?
Mm. I think it definitely helps. The fact that I was able to, over these last 8 years or so, work with so many different kinds of companies, and see, at the end of the day, a lot of issues that we face, I think, sometimes we can make it very personal. Sometimes we can make it very circumstantial, but there's always seems to be systemic issues to things. And if we can address solutions in a systemic way, we can make such a larger, lasting impact. So yeah, hopefully taking it more of a, not necessarily objective approach, but taking a more calculated
Hmm.
look at things.
And as of now, what do you think success looks like after the trip? So after you finish it, obviously you're not going to have necessarily built the business and all this kind of stuff. But what are
Yeah,
you kind of thinking of yourself as like your KPIs?
it's a good question. One that I've regularly kind of asked myself as I
Yeah.
prep for this trip. But ultimately, if we could come away from after these 6 months and say, yeah, we definitely see this product as a potential solution to make lasting change,
Mhm.
and just have an idea of what we want to go to market with. I mean, that would be my ideal goal.
Like one
Um,
product,
yeah, well, my initial idea, maybe a bit ambitious, is 3 products.
3 products.
One to represent a community in Southeast Asia, one in the Middle East, and one in Africa, just to kind of make it apparent that it's not about a single region,
Sure,
single
of
area.
course.
But again, that's quite ambitious to launch with 3. Um,
And what do you think is going to be the toughest aspect of it?
well, there's a reason why these communities have trouble going to market, right? So whether it's government corruption, whether it's a quality supply issue, or whether there's just so much barriers in terms
Yeah.
of costings for shipping. So it's literally going to have to take a look through all of those things. Um, but at the same time, just because it's a problem that's quite complex doesn't mean it's something that can't be addressed. Or even if it's not fully addressed, it can still make such a big difference if we can even make uh, a small change for specific communities.
Hmm.
So at the end of the day, it's really just hey, why don't we do something, because we all have the ability to do something,
Yeah.
even if it's big, small, whatever it is.
Cool. Do you see any others as kind of inspiration at this point? So like,
Mm.
have you been watching, whether it's products or social enterprises or companies doing things that you are maybe in the back of your mind, maybe at the front of your mind, wanting to model yourself after?
Yeah, there's been kind of a trend of these startups that are focusing on development, but using more like skills trade or educational trade. And I love how they're looking at things from kind of a longer lasting, sustaining way.
Okay.
There's one startup based in San Francisco called Source, where basically they take a look at impoverished communities and give them skills and like digital skills, and basically work with corporations to outsource
Hmm.
their services to these centers that
Hmm.
they create. And that's great because those skills are going to last and stay with those communities, and they can keep building that out. And there's a new one called Talent Trade that does a similar idea, but they created a curriculum that's based on frameworks for solving problems and different skills that basically the founders have picked up through their time in management consulting,
Hmm.
that type of thing. They get corporations to partner with them, sponsor a training. They facilitate it on behalf of charity workers or nonprofit workers. And so again, the idea of, if we can address some tiny shifts in mindsets over time, that creates huge impact down
Hmm.
the road. So yeah, those are two I'm definitely looking at.
Yeah.
Yeah, for
Awesome.
sure.
Cool. And is it just you right
Um,
now?
Officially, yeah.
Okay.
But unofficially, there's been so many different folks involved. It's this whole idea where I'm going into these communities as well. Like I've chosen them specifically because of connections.
Yeah.
Because if we're hoping to really get deep into a culture, we can't just be an outsider and hope to just know everything, right?
Yeah, I was about to say, I think partnerships seem to be your biggest
Mm,
challenge, right? Yeah.
yeah,
Like,
definitely.
yeah.
So in that same way, where okay, we know that we need to partner with these people,
Mhm.
and to find out what really would help them, what really would address
Mhm.
problems. In the same way, in what we're building, there's no way that anyone can be an expert in everything.
Of
So
course. Yeah.
trying to leverage as much as possible different
Cool.
skills and different people.
And will you be sharing your kind of your journey as you go?
Yeah, actually, definitely. I think the whole strength of this is building a community of like-minded people.
Sure.
So I'm definitely putting a big focus around video, photography, all of that as we go.
Cool. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, as soon as you have the channels for that, let us know and we'll
Yeah,
share
I
it.
definitely will. It will be an Instagram called the Mino Project, and the
Sorry, the
website,
what?
the Mino
The
Project,
Mino Project. Just that as in
Mino.
okay. Mino
Yeah,
Project on
Mino
the
Project.
Mino Project on Instagram. Okay, cool.
Yep, and also the website will be theminoproject.com.
Cool. All
So
right. Okay, great. We'll spread the word.
awesome.
All right. Thanks very much. Thanks so much for your time.
Cool. Thanks, Rob.
Alrighty.
All
Take
right, that
care.
was fun. Thanks.